This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories. A striking escalation of trade hostilities as China vows firm and forceful steps to protect its interests after steep U.S. import tariffs of 104% go into effect. Now, stock markets resume their slump after a day's reprieve. Investors panicking amid fears that President Donald Trump's blow to commerce will spark a global recession. And China says it is verifying claims that its nationals have been fighting alongside Russian forces in Ukraine after Kyiv said it had captured 2 Chinese citizens in the Russian-occupied Donetsk region. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, in a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, underscores deepening ties and shared challenges. And South Korea's main opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, steps down as party chief, fanning expectations about a potential presidential run for an early June election. Also in East Asia tonight, empty or abandoned homes dot the landscape of rural Japan. Their numbers now in the millions are set to rise due to a shrinking and rapidly aging population. But could such properties get a new lease of life as more people, both foreign and domestic, take an interest? China has stressed that it does not want a trade war with the United States, repeating an often said line that there are no winners in such a scenario. Still, Beijing said it will be ready to take the fight against the world's #1 economy should America continue to ramp up tensions. A 104% tariff is currently in effect for Chinese goods coming into the U.S., put in place by the Trump administration. Well, China is America's major trading partner, but at the same time, a top economic rival. Meantime, Mr. Trump has signed an executive order that triples the previously announced levies on packages from China that goes through the international postal system. These packages, typically worth less than $800, will now attract duties that are 90% of the shipment's value from 2nd of May. That's up from the original levy of 30% of the shipment's value. For more, we are joined now by our Beijing correspondent, Tan Sihui. Sihui, first up, give us details of China's response to that increased 104% tariff by the U.S. They can't be too pleased about that.
Well, China remains defiant and it reiterated its stance, saying that it will fight this trade war to the very end. At this Foreign Affairs Ministry conference today with journalists, and it had condemned the hegemonic and bullying acts by the U.S., and it said that it will take resolute and strong means to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests.
美方仍在对中国滥施关税，一味地进行极限施压，对这种霸道霸凌行径，中方坚决反对，绝不接受。美方如果真的想通过对话谈判解决问题，就应该拿出平等、尊重、互惠的态度。如果美方置两国和国际社会的利益于不顾，执意打关税战、贸易战，中方必将奉陪到底。
A white paper was also released by China stating that China-U.S. relations, specifically trade and economic relations, have been impacted negatively. And the Commerce Ministry had came out to say that it has strong will and abundant means to take countermeasures if the U.S. continues to escalate the trade war. But beyond this war of words, economists and observers I spoke with say that it's crucial to find out just what exactly these countermeasures that China says that it will take. Because the challenge is that when it comes to a trade war, it will be challenging for China to respond in kind, as it will make life very difficult for businesses both in the U.S. and China, as well as consumers. And so we have to watch out for what China is likely to do. And this really comes as last year, what we do know is that the trade in goods between U.S. China has come up to around $585 billion US, and both economies make up a huge proportion of the global economy, accounting for about 40%.
Now, quite a blow to these businesses in China, and you've been speaking to some firms and where you are. How are they dealing with this escalation?
Well, first, the economists and observers are saying that this trade war is looking and set to be a pivotal moment in history, saying that the U.S. is upending a trade system that it itself built. The Chinese are now shoring up trade relations with South Korea and Japan, and this just comes as Chinese President Xi Jinping, he made his first comment since the escalation of the trade war. He says that China needs to firm up and strengthen strategic relations with its neighboring countries, possibly opening up new areas of cooperation. Now, the Chinese are also looking closely at the trade negotiation with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Japan, and this according to an analyst, say that this could be a template for other countries to follow. Now, I spoke with some businessmen who are based in both the U.S. and China, and they, of course, say that their businesses have taken a hard hit, but they are remaining optimistic, saying that the market will gradually adjust itself. I also spoke with some Chinese nationals. Well, their sentiments are the opposite. Now, let's take a listen.
我觉得这就是无理取闹啊。因为说认真的，全球化贸易是美国自己组织起来的，然后他想掀台子，我觉得这是一件很无理取闹的事情。我觉得我们应该坚决抵制吧。
像我们这种大学生，肯定还是实用和那个费用和性价比为主去选择产品的话，就是这样子。所以它确实有可能是带动国货发展的一个机会。
Hearing some very nationalistic sentiments there. Online social media commentators linked to the state media, they have also suggested some countermeasures that can be taken to the U.S., saying that perhaps China can import less or fewer Hollywood films. In fact, they're saying that they could even ban them, and they're also hoping to see fentanyl cooperation with the U.S. being stopped. The measures are also including targeting U.S. services, which China buys more than it sells.
All right, thanks very much for that report. CNA's Tan Si-hui in Beijing. Meanwhile, close U.S. allies and major trading partners talking about Japan and South Korea, they have scheduled talks with the Trump administration. They're among countries making concerted efforts to hold negotiations with Washington for last-minute concessions.
And we're doing very well in making, I call them tailored deals, not off the rack. These are tailored, highly tailored deals. Right now, Japan is flying here to make a deal. South Korea is flying here to make a deal, and others are flying here.
The South Korea's trade minister is in Washington to meet with his U.S. counterpart as Seoul braces for the impact of an additional 25% tariff that took effect earlier today. Well, officials say they will prioritize efforts to lower tariff rates in the negotiations. Well, the meeting comes a day after Mr. Trump expressed optimism following a phone call with South Korean acting leader Han Duck-soo, with the American president saying that there is a probability for a great deal for both countries. A U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, meantime, will be leading trade talks with Japan alongside a trade representative, Jamieson Greer. Mr. Bessent says that Japan is a very important military and economic ally and that he expects Japan to get priority because they came forward quickly. Japan's finance minister says trade negotiations with Washington could include foreign exchange rates. Tokyo has been slapped with 24% reciprocal tariffs on top of a sweeping 10% levy last week. And let's go over to Roland Lim now for a roundup of market reaction.
Thanks, Oteli. The reprieve in the region lasted just a day. It's a sea of red. Stock markets gave up their gains from a day earlier and fell. The Nikkei 225 ending nearly 4% lower in a broad sell-off driven by losses in tech stocks. Semicon stocks, Advantest and Tokyo Electron fell about 8% and 6% respectively. Now, tech investor SoftBank Group declining 7.2%, but investors are still hopeful that Tokyo might be able to carve out a tariff deal with the U.S. South Korean's Kospi ending 1.75% in the red. The benchmark has lost some 20% from its July high, confirming a bear market. Taiwan weighted index finishing down nearly 6% despite the government activating a $15 billion stabilization fund to calm the market. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer said that President Trump wouldn't provide exemptions to individual products or companies, damping hopes that Apple's iPhones might escape tariffs. Taiwanese companies are key manufacturing partners for Apple. Chinese and Hong Kong stocks closed higher, though, after China published a white paper indicating openness to talks following 104% U.S. tariffs, and as state pledges to support the local market, also boosting sentiment. Trump's most punitive tariffs hitting the so-called world's factory floor is seen to disrupt supply chains that were recently rejigged to work around U.S.-China tensions. And given the region's dependence on U.S. trade, the tariff shock may also pose significant growth challenges to Asian economies and leave policymakers with tough decisions ahead.
Right, for more insights, we are joined now by Dr. Li Yao, Senior Research Fellow at the East Asian Institute, National University of Singapore. Now, Dr. Li, I believe that Mr. Trump, right, he just slammed the brakes on all these Chinese goods flooding the U.S. market with tariffs on all these low-value packages. So I guess he's targeting big companies like Shein and Temu, right? So how disruptive you think could this be for China's e-commerce giants?
Yeah, this is going to be a big damage, actually, for this sector of the economy. Because, Shein at the beginning, actually it's fast growth. It starts from U.S., not from China, because within China, there is already Alibaba and the Jingdong. So they heavily rely on the overseas markets. So in addition to U.S. action, actually, there are also other countries worried about, the cheap good from China through this kind of platform. So they may follow the U.S. action.
President Trump has called these tariffs highly tailored deals. But this really is just to leverage pressure on its allies, Japan, South Korea. I mean, even Singapore said that this is not a way to treat your friends. What exactly is he angling as their representatives head to Washington? Yeah,
actually, I agree with his claim that it's tailored. Because for different countries, he has different target. It's like, I read the news as he's using the tariff as one-stop shopping to get all the other purpose. So for example, like Singapore has the trade deficit with US actually, but he still charged the 10%, right? And then for other Southeast Asian country, the Vietnam, we know that has a big surplus with U.S. market. Actually, Vietnam's export to U.S. account for 30%, contribute to 30% of Vietnam's GDP. However, for the Indonesia's export to U.S. only account for 2% of its GDP. Very small, but they still get more than 30% of the tariff. So this is kind of definitely not just for the trade deficit surplus issue, right? It's for something else.
Yeah, because we talked about how, he's got all these tariffs even on uninhabited islands run by penguins, at McDonald's Islands in Australia. So I guess the big question is, you mentioned this is sort of like Trump's one-stop shopping, right? Some people are saying, could this possibly trigger now an all-out economic war? And what exactly is the end game here? What are your thoughts on that?
If we want to guess the end of the war, I guess the two largest economy, the market, might be segmented at the end, just separate. So each of them just play with other countries by themselves. Yeah, because I think it's also because of the pandemic. So during the pandemic, on the like the first episode, most of the other countries dysfunctioned for their production. So they all rely on the Chinese product, right? Then suddenly they realize, whoa, the supply from China is so important, and China has the full supply chain actually, the ecosystem, and then. The second episode is like in 2022, when Chinese cities locked down one by one, in turns. And then they suddenly are aware that, oh, okay, without China, we can still survive. And also we need the China plus one. That's what happened. Later on, we can see that, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, all those economies, they trying to set up other supply chains in other places, including ASEAN country and also Latin America and, other regions. So now actually, for countries, economies other than China, actually there is already set up a backup. Maybe still not completely compete with China, but still, yeah, it's possible. That's why U.S. now maybe think that, okay, we can try.
But again, I guess the next question would be, can China survive without the U.S.? I mean, why might China think that it can actually win this tariff war against the U.S.? What levers can it pull?
Okay, first of all, like I said, China already set up the full supply chain of the manufacturing within China. Only some, high-end, advanced, like semiconductor chips, they don't have. But now, U.S. already sanctioned China in this area. They cannot get. So basically, what China wants from U.S. won't sell to China. Okay, then why don't develop our own capability in this area? And then secondly, if we look at the data, China's export to U.S. In 2016, that's before the first episode of the trade war, it's account for more than 18% of China's export. But now it's only 12%. In addition, these 12% only account for 2% of China's GDP. So it's only 2%. So for China, if just look at the macro data, we'll feel that it won't be that hard. No. It won't be that hard. So why don't we try?
Okay, so if they won't be that hurt, then who in Asia is going to be taking the biggest hit, though?
Yeah, that's what I'm worried. I'm worried is that, just I said, the China's export to U.S. account for 18% before. Now it's 12%. But we know that in 2024, China's export has hit a record high. So where are those Chinese products goes? Goes to other markets, diversify to other markets, right? So that's why, ASEAN country and the European feel the flood from China. We can imagine if China's, the rest 12% of the export also turn around from U.S. to other regions, it's going to be a big flood. So I think the ASEAN country and all other countries should be prepared of this kind of flood. Yeah.
No doubt we'll be following that very closely. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you, Dr. Liao.
And we were just talking to Dr. Liao, a senior research fellow at the East Asian Institute, National University of Singapore.
Coming up on East Asia Tonight.
South Korea announces billions of dollars in support for its auto industry as policymakers across the region take action to blunt the effect of the trade war.
Foxconn says it's eager to work with Japanese automakers, including Nissan, to form a strong Japan-Taiwan alliance.
Millions of abandoned houses as populations shrink.
処分ができずにですね、もう本当に家の中がゴミ屋敷みたいな。
A sign of rural decline or a chance for change.
空き家をですね使って本当に民宿とかもね増やしていけたらな。
Japan's empty homes tonight on CNA.
This too is my fiancé. We start writing to each other as pen pal. He brightened up my days here. Hello. Still got 8 months more. Are you willing to wait?
It's my first face-to-face visit with my family in this incarceration. They still love me?
I don't know whether anybody gonna fetch me after my release.
Singapore's public housing is among the best in the world. But in recent years,
people would tell me that, HDB flats are unaffordable.
Everything is awful.
The minute we issue the ballot results, we'll be bombarded with a lot of latency. Why am I unsuccessful?
We get exclusive access to the people at the heart of these closely guarded processes.
Take some photos. Perhaps many of us do not know that actually valuation is the base of setting the prices of HDB new flats.
Yes, we know the trends. We understand the concerns and the feedback.
Is it time to relook the model?
Most of the things we handle are confidential. This will be the first time where it's out in public.
Singapore's public housing revealed. On demand at cna.asia.
I'm trying to build a sustainable floating farm that has both agriculture and aquaculture.
私の出荷サイズで250個から350個。
But I also wanted to benefit the environment.
なので、少しでも育てて海に持って行ってそういう場所を作ってやるっていうことを作業をやっています。
I'm trying out a new way of farming in Growing Wild Project Castaway, Friday on CNA.
It feels so forbidding.
Tucked away in Singapore's former Supreme Court.
This was one of the most dramatic murder trials ever to take place.
This painting actually changed the destiny of Singapore.
Uncover the untold stories that laid the groundwork for Singapore's nationhood. Hidden Histories, Sunday on CNA.
Hello again. Glad to have you with us on East Asia tonight. Once again, we have Roland Lim standing by with more business news updates. And Roland, tell us exactly what kind of moves the governments in the region are taking to lessen the effect of the trade war we're experiencing right now.
I'll tell you, from pledges to supporting the stock market to announcing financial aid for traders to tweaking monetary stance, policymakers are attempting to ease the pain from a thunderous blow to the world economy. South Korea ramping up support for its motor vehicle industry. It's trying to cushion the blow of Trump's tariffs on a sector that's seen rising exports to the US. Now, that's as import cars and light trucks have been hit with a 25% tariff. The measures include financial support as well as tax cuts and even subsidies to boost domestic demand. This while the government vows to negotiate with Washington as well as expand exports to other markets. Seoul expects the levies to cause significant damage to the auto industry, although it has not yet quantified this. South Korea's auto-related exports to the US totaled some $43 billion last year. A look at some of the better-known brands that are exported there. Hyundai and Kia both slid around 0.6% by the close of trade. Bank of Japan Governor Kazuo Ueda suggests the central bank may take a pause in interest rate hikes as U.S. tariffs jolt markets and as the potential damage from tariffs become more clear. Mr. Ueda reiterated the central bank's intent to raise interest rates if the economy continues to move in line with its current projections. The remarks comes ahead of the BOJ's next policy meeting at the end of the month, when it's seen to be keeping interest rates steady at 0.5% and issuing fresh quarterly economic and price forecasts. Japan's corporate earnings are projected to likely come under considerable pressure from the aggressive trade war. Japanese firms rely on the US for 20% of their earnings. That's among the highest ratios for corporates from emerging and developed markets. Most economists expect Trump's tariffs to knock some 0.6 percentage point off Japan's economic growth in the current fiscal year. Asian Development Bank chief economist Albert Park weighed in on what the region's affected economies can do to navigate the economic pain from the tariffs.
I don't think regional trade can fully make up for the lack of U.S. demand. The U.S. is the largest importing country in the entire world. So if that demand is reduced substantially, it's hard to replace. Obviously, I think countries in the region, in China and Vietnam, elsewhere, will be looking for alternative export destinations within the region or even other parts of the world. But the challenge, of course, is that so many countries are being affected by this same negative economic shock at the same time. It may be difficult for other economies to absorb more imports from other countries when they're also facing their own shocks. So that will be also difficult, and I think it's also important for countries in the region to really cooperate with each other to find fair and common solutions to how to address these challenges. Of course, over time, it could be that investment and trade can adjust to the new demand structure in the world that is being changed by the new tariff regime in the United States. But again, that will take a little bit of time. And countries obviously can also use their own monetary and fiscal policies to try to smooth the adjustment to these shocks. They can try to support vulnerable firms, vulnerable groups of workers. But that will be challenging if the tariffs persist. Eventually, there's going to have to be structural changes that reflect those changes in opportunity. And really, at the end of the day, it is going to create some pain in the region. I don't think we should underestimate the potential harms that this will have on economies in the region if they persist indefinitely. One thing that we've also seen is there's now an expectation in the markets that U.S. interest rates will go down faster than had previously been expected because of falling aggregate demand and concerns about growth by the U.S. Fed. And so if that's the case, I think central banks in the region do have space, I think, to lower their interest rates.
And I'll be back with more business news a little later on. Rutte.
Oh, really putting you to work today, Roland. I'll speak to you soon. All right, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China urges its citizens to avoid getting involved in armed conflict amid Kyiv's claims that it captured 2 Chinese nationals fighting for Russia in Ukraine. And the NATO chief stresses for stronger ties with Japan as he meets with leader Shigeru Ishiba.
Join local companions for lunch in Indonesia's largest city.
Warung makan di Jakarta tuh kita bisa temukan semua daerah.
From a delivery rider who gets hearty meals on a budget.
Warteg ini menyediakan makanan yang murah meriah, bikin kenyang kita tapi bergizi.
To the young and trendy who will line up for their favorite desserts.
Ini unik banget karena kita pesannya lewat kayak mesin ATM.
Lunch with us. Sunday on CNA.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines you are following. Beijing warns that it is ready for trade war, vowing firm and forceful steps to protect its interests as U.S. import tariffs of 104% targeting Chinese goods go into effect. The stock markets resume their slump after a day's reprieve as investors fear U.S. President Donald Trump's blow to commerce will spark a global recession. And China says it's verifying Ukraine's claim that 2 of its nationals were captured while fighting alongside Russia. Beijing, meantime, has also firmly rejected Kyiv's assertion that more Chinese nationals are fighting in the war.
中方正在向乌方核实有关的情况。需要强调的是，中国政府始终要求本国公民远离武装冲突区域，避免以任何形式卷入武装冲突，尤其应避免参加任何一方的军事行动。
Earlier, Ukrainian President Zelensky posted this video purportedly showing one of the Chinese men it captured. The individual is in handcuffs and appears to describe a battle in Mandarin. Mr. Zelensky says the 2 men had identification documents on them, including bank cards with personal data. He adds Ukrainian intelligence showed the presence of many other Chinese fighters in Russia's army. The Ukrainian president has also called for a response from Western allies. Now, the Ukraine war has seen foreign participants fighting for either Kyiv or Moscow since the conflict began. Ukraine calls those fighting on its behalf volunteers, and there's even been prisoner exchanges in the past for such volunteers. One such example was in September 2022, when Britain's Sean Pinner and Aidan Aslin were freed in exchange for Viktor Medvedchuk, who is a wealthy Ukrainian close to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Russia has made extensive use of both volunteers and contracted mercenaries to bolster its forces. The plan to get foreign fighters was backed by President Vladimir Putin in March 2022, promising lucrative salaries and benefits. Among those who signed up are Chinese nationals who have posted their experiences on social media. While there is no way to effectively verify their claims of fighting in a conflict, they are seen wearing equipment and clothing consistent with those of Russian troops. Now, the presence of these individuals differ from troops deployed by North Korea to assist Russia. The reclusive state is the only one to have sent its own soldiers to assist Moscow. And even then, they were only deployed in Russia and not allowed to fight inside Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, despite Western claims that China is covertly supporting Russia's war in Ukraine, an allegation it denies, Beijing has consistently called for peace and a swift end to the conflict and is seeking to mediate an end to the war. China also says it has not supplied Russia with lethal arms and ammunition and has urged its citizens to avoid participating in any armed conflicts. Now, a Chinese citizen fighting for Russia in Ukraine spoke to Chinese media, saying that many who joined the fight had a romanticized idea of the war, but the brutality on the battlefield quickly shattered such illusions. He says he and other Chinese participants faced racial discrimination and that those unwilling to kill were imprisoned. He also claims those seeking to leave also find themselves trapped as contracts are arbitrarily extended, with Russian units refusing to let them leave. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba have pledged to strengthen ties and deepen cooperation amid rising global security threats. In the last hour, Mr. Rutte inspected the Guard of Honor alongside Mr. Ishiba, who is a strong advocate for building a NATO-style security framework in Asia. The 2 leaders held talks where they acknowledged the increasingly challenging and dangerous global security environment and issued a joint statement.
We just had a very good discussion on how we can boost our cooperation even more. We agreed a joint statement which sets out our vision on how to further strengthen our cooperation. And this is crucial especially at this pivotal time for security and stability, both in the Euro-Atlantic and indeed, as you said, in close connection with the Indo-Pacific.
Earlier today, Mr. Rutte delivered a speech at Tokyo's Keio University, warning that the outcome of the war in Ukraine could have a substantial impact on security in Asia. He noted that China is closely observing the conflict and accused Beijing of indirectly supporting Moscow's war efforts. Mr. Rutte said that the stakes go beyond Europe, suggesting that if Russia is allowed to succeed through force, it could set a dangerous precedent in East Asia. He called for stronger NATO-Japan ties, pointing to the links in European and Pacific security environments. China said that the U.S. has maliciously attacked Beijing over the Panama Canal after Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth accused China of threatening the key waterways operations. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said the, quote, smearing by Mr. Hegseth undermines cooperation between China and Panama, and that it also exposes what China calls the bullying nature of the U.S. Mr. Hegseth made those comments during a visit to Panama. He's the second senior U.S. official to visit the Central American nation since President Donald Trump took office in January.
And today, the Panama Canal faces ongoing threats. The United States of America will not allow communist China or any other country to threaten the canal's operation or integrity. To this end, the United States and Panama have done more in recent weeks to strengthen our defense and security cooperation than we have in decades.
The Chinese embassy in Panama earlier refuted Mr. Hegseth's claim that Beijing interferes in the operations of the Panama Canal and urged the U.S. to stop its blackmail and plundering of Panama. Turning our attention to South Korea, the country's main opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, is stepping down as party chief as expectations grow over his possible run for the presidency.
출발할 때는 험했는데 그래도 퇴임하는 상황에서는 출발할 때보다는 상황이 좋은 것 같아요. 모두 여러분들의 덕분입니다. 이제 또 새로운 일을 시작하게 되겠죠.
Mr. Lee did not confirm if he is throwing his hat into the ring, but reports suggest he could announce his bid for the top job as early as Thursday. South Korea will pick its next president on 3rd of June, after former President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment was upheld last week over his martial law declaration last December. Mr. Lee lost to Mr. Yoon by a razor-thin margin in the 2022 polls, but he led his Democratic Party to a landslide victory in a recent parliamentary election. Several politicians from the ruling People Power Party have declared their candidacy, including Labour Minister Kim Moon-soo, while Seoul Mayor Oh Se-hoon is reportedly expected to announce his bid soon. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, how rural towns in Japan are attempting to revive and repurpose millions of abandoned homes left empty by its population crisis. And amid trade tensions between the two largest economies, an AI-generated video goes viral in China.
This too is my fiancé. We start writing to each other as pen pal. He brightened up my days here. Hello. Still got 8 months more. Are you willing to wait?
It's my first face-to-face visit with my family in this incarceration. You still love me?
I don't know whether anybody gonna fetch me after my release.
Tensions are escalating between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
We are just responding to the use of force. We are being attacked. What do you expect?
What will conflict cost the two countries?
If Pakistan cannot protect the Chinese, they're right if they leave.
And how did allies turn into adversaries?
We thought that, oh, the Afghan Taliban, they are in a pocket. No, absolutely wrong.
Insight, Thursday on CNA.
With the uncertainties of the financial world, where does our economy truly stand? Keep up to date with the latest market trends and get the in-depth analysis that you need to understand the forces driving the global economies. Stay informed on the developments of the business world. Asia Business on Asia Tonight. Weeknights on CNA. This segment is brought to you by Standard Chartered Priority Banking.
I'm trying to build a sustainable floating farm that has both agriculture and aquaculture.
私の出荷サイズで250個から350個。
But I also wanted to benefit the environment.
なので、少しでも育てて海に持って行ってそういう場所を作ってやるっていうことを作業をやっています。
I'm trying out a new way of farming in Growing Wild Project Castaway, Friday on CNA.
ASEAN's chief says that the bloc must act boldly to ramp up regional economic integration in the face of America's sweeping tariffs. Now, his remarks come ahead of a key meeting of the bloc's economic and finance ministers, where the fallout from Washington's new levies tops the agenda. Well, the U.S. has slapped some of its steepest tariffs on ASEAN member states. The bloc's Secretary General, Dr. Kao Kim-hon, described the imposition of new duties as a wake-up call, one that lays bare the fragility of the global trading system. Dr. Kao also called for urgent and collective action, not only in integrating the bloc's economies, but also in diversifying its markets and partnerships. And it is time again for some news from the business world with Roland Lim. Now, Roland, let's talk about the Trump administration. Apparently, they're rethinking its plan of slapping fees on China-linked ships calling on U.S. ports. What's that all about?
That's right, Rutte. Nothing's confirmed yet, but reports suggesting there's been a considerable backlash from the related industries. Now, several industries have reportedly called the proposal, quote, economically devastating. They say the move could make it impossible to ship everything from coal to soya beans to the markets because of the prevalence of Chinese-linked vessels in the existing global shipping fleet and the time it would take to replace them. Sources told Reuters that the Trump administration is now looking at alternatives, and these include delaying the rollout of a new fee structure designed to reduce the overall cost to visiting Chinese vessels. It is also considering a variable fee system, such as charging based on the number of Chinese-built ships in a company's fleet. First introduced by the U.S. Trade Representative, or USTR, in February, the proposed fee of $3 million per port call would apply to ships built in China or operated by Chinese companies. The proposal built on a claim the fees would curb China's growing commercial and military dominance in the high seas and promote the U.S. domestic maritime industry. China says the measures would not revitalize America's shipbuilding industry, but only, quote, harm others and itself. Taiwan's Foxconn sees Japan as a big opportunity for growing its electric vehicle business. Its chief strategy officer for EV says the firm hopes to agree on partnerships with Japanese companies as soon as possible. Foxconn's interest in working with Japanese automakers come as they face a threat from Chinese brands that have turned to battery-powered vehicles to aggressively win shares in markets such as Europe, Brazil, and Thailand. Mr. Jun Seki says Foxconn is finalizing a deal with Mitsubishi to supply it with electric vehicles, which is scheduled for launch in Oceania next year. Foxconn is also set to manufacture EV buses for the Japanese market. The Taiwanese company is best known as a contract manufacturer of electronic devices, including smartphones. It is now aiming to make a name for itself in EVs, using its expertise in integrating information technology and electronics. South Korean battery maker Samsung SDI is trimming the price of its new shares in light of the global market slump as U.S. tariffs bite. The funds are for a U.S. joint venture with General Motors and to expand factory capacity in Hungary, among other investments. It's now planning to sell them at 146,200 Korean won apiece. That's about $98.40 US. And that's down from 169,200 won per share. Now, at the new price, it'll raise about $1.4 billion. The final price will be set on the 19th of May. Samsung SDI shares closed 2.6% in the red in today's trade. It is the latest company in Asia to change plans after the market meltdown. Two well-known Japanese beer companies, Suntory and Asahi, as well as instant noodle maker Nissin, postponed their bond deals this week. Indian electric maker Ather Energy is considering cutting its $400 million IPO by $50 million, given the uncertainty in the market. Companies that rely heavily on China manufacturing are expected to take a significant hit from U.S. tariffs. One such firm is Apple, which just lost its crown as the most valuable public company to Microsoft, following a 23% plunge in shares over the last 4 sessions on Wall Street. Now, CNA's Liz Neo explains how tariff pain could impact Apple's flagship product.
Well, Apple is seen as one of the most exposed companies to the trade war because of its heavy reliance on China. And now hefty tariffs could make Apple's #1 cash cow even more expensive. The tech giant sold more than 230 million iPhones last year to rake in an estimated $200 billion. That is more than half of the company's total revenue. The iPhone is essentially an expensive puzzle made with pieces sourced from all over the world. Take the iPhone 16 Pro, for example. Its processor comes from Taiwan. The rear camera is imported from Japan, which also supplies storage. The battery and the main enclosure are made in China, while the display may be sourced from South Korea. A research from Tech Insights shows that Apple used to spend about $550 for all that hardware and more. Factoring 54% tariffs for China, when 9 in 10 iPhones are assembled, the cost rises to $850. But with the Trump administration now proceeding with another 50% tariff, that could balloon further. Now, Apple could offset some of the cost by instead importing its iPhones from India, where tariffs are significantly lower than China's. The Wall Street Journal reports that Apple is already planning to source more phones from India as a short-term fix. Rosenblatt Securities research shows that Apple would need to hike iPhone prices by 43% to help offset the cost. Now, this means the iPhone 16 Pro that would set you back $999 now could soon be worth about $1,430. Well, the research adds that Apple faces nearly $40 billion in tariff costs. And if the company absorbs all of the additional costs, it could take a 32% bite out of operating profit. Well, Apple customers were reportedly rushing to U.S. stores to panic buy devices over the weekend. Bloomberg quoting Apple employees who say they have seen an increase in sales, with customers asking about potential price hikes due to the tariffs.
Well, amid the heightened U.S.-China trade tensions, an AI-generated video of Americans working in sweatshops is making the rounds on Chinese social media. The video, set to traditional Chinese music, pokes fun at President Trump's bid to bring factories back to the U.S. It's now trending on U.S. social media apps as well. Last week, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, in an interview on Fox News, defended Mr. Trump's latest round of tariffs. And in a comment that prompted criticism by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Mr. Vance said the U.S. was borrowing money from China to buy things manufactured by, quote, Chinese peasants.
中方对中美经贸关系的立场已经讲得很清楚了。听到这位副总统说出这样无知又缺乏礼貌的话，令人诧异，也感到悲哀。
So, interesting video. I love the music that accompanied that AI video. But, I mean, on a more serious note, right, Roland? How is this affecting U.S.-China tensions amid all the escalating tariffs?
Well, it does complicate things, doesn't it, Otali? I mean, the last thing that China and the U.S. needs right now is more controversy, especially this kind. And you can see why J.D. Vance has actually caught quite a lot of flack from the Chinese authorities. It was because of his tone and the irony of it, which I will get into later. But we did take to the streets of Shanghai a little earlier on, and we got some reaction from the citizens there. Have a listen.
我们一看过这个没听到过，但是他如果说中国人是乡巴佬，我只想对他说一句：我们有自己的骨气，我不管是乡巴佬还是什么样的精英呢？
我觉得他们国家给我的印象一直就是自负的那种状态，所以我觉得他们能说出来也不奇怪，但是这肯定也不是对于双边关系有好的一些言辞上的表达，我觉得这也是他们自己的问题。
有可能他们只是用媒体编造了一个巨大的谎言，让当地的一些民众去相信这些谎言，所以他才会用到乡巴佬这个词。觉得有可能他们这是一些愚民政策。
So the arrogance of the U.S. Vice President, that wasn't unexpected from the people you've just heard there. But the irony, remember J.D. Vance had branded himself as a man of the working class. I mean, he himself...
That's correct, yeah.
He himself came from Appalachia, where rural, dirt poor, and then he wrote a bestseller about it, the Hillbilly Elegy.
I remember that, yeah.
Yes. So he was basically trying to channel and to repeat the message that Trump has been saying all this while, that China had outsourced its manufacturing to low-wage countries, and because of that, had to borrow money from them and to pay them and to sustain that. So they want to bring jobs back. Now, he used a rather crude version of what he was probably referring to, low-wage workers, but he used Chinese peasants. So the irony there really not lost to the Chinese themselves. But ultimately, he was trying to reach out to Trump's voter base, keeping with the political message. He might have underestimated how big of a backlash, global backlash this has, especially with China being very nationalistic. But at the same time, I mean, J.D. Vance is also a very provocative figure. I mean, maybe he was wanting to poke the Chinese in the eye just to, stir up some debate or controversy.
Yeah, and also I think makes people wonder, has he forgotten his roots, as you've mentioned there? Well, thank you so very much, Roland, for that report. Now, in other news, Japan is facing a housing problem. Vast numbers of abandoned homes due to depopulation. There are, in fact, 9 million empty homes across the country, posing a hazard and potentially stifling development. Well, CNA's Michio Ishida heads to Japan's rural towns, which are on a mission to solve this problem.
Community leader Yoshiji Misaki is in the midst of a survey to gather data on abandoned homes in the rural city of Uda in Nara Prefecture. Like this house, which has stood largely untouched for 25 years. A doctor once lived and ran a clinic here, but he died and the family moved away.
美咲さんがこれまで見た、空き家の中で、一番これはちょっとやばいよなと思ったのってどういう状態のものでしたか？
こうして古くなってしてきてるっていう空き家もあれば、元の住んでた方のその処分ができずにですね、もう本当に家の中がゴミ屋敷みたいな感じになっている空き家もありますし。
Almost 1 in 5 houses in Uda are vacant homes or akiya. It's a reflection of demographic trends as young people move to bigger cities for work, leaving behind shrinking, aging rural towns. Most akiya are unlivable before renovations, with the worst at risk of collapse.
うちで行ってダメな場合は、危険空き家とみなして、個没と国の方で危険空き家の認定を受けたら、行政が処分しなさいと。ただ利活用できる空き家はまだ国の中で法律はできてないんです。
Uda hands out as much as 2 million yen in business grants, or about $13,500 for renovation. Listings of cheap akiya for sale, compiled by city councils or private operators, are also drawing buyers from abroad. French photographer Colleen Aguirre is one of 380 foreigners now living in Uda. She bought an akiya for $33,000, roughly half the price of a new home. Though she warns renovation costs can offset the savings.
So far, I have invested up to $60K US, but I'm planning to invest probably the same amount on the next 3 years.
Over in the ancient castle town of Kitsuki in Oita Prefecture in Japan's southwest, the locals are taking it upon themselves to breathe new life into Akiya. Here, Kitsuki City's population is fast declining, while those over 65 make up about 39%. That's 10 points higher than the national average. Akiya, or vacant homes, make up 24% of all homes here, also 10 points higher than the national average.
この1年でほんの100メートルの中で8人の高齢者の方々がもうお年で亡くなりました。そうするともうそれに伴い空き家になってしまうんですね。
Her family's 150-year-old restaurant almost became an Akiya too, as she and her children did not want to run the business.
私はもう壊すしかないって思ってたんですね。ところがこれを壊すと地域の人の思い出までもがみんな寂しい思いになってしまう。だから何とかして残そうっていうふうに考えるようになりました。
The ground floor is now rented out for gatherings and events. Upstairs, renovated rooms provide lodgings that see a steady stream of bookings. The success story has spurred the community to band together and restore the town to its former glory.
年ぐらい前までしてたんですけど、
Kayako Goto and her 92-year-old mother reopened their family-run restaurant 30 years after shutting it, but as an ice cream shop. And the owners of the town's sake brewery are eyeing a taste of the hotel business.
空き家をですね使って本当に民宿とかもね増やしていけたらなとかいうちょっと夢はあります。はい。
Local authorities say some residents who left the town are coming back as it hands out relocation and business grants.
戻るときに空き家を活用して何かを始めるっていう方とかも年々増えてきているので、そういう空き家を使った取り組みをされる方のネットワークがより強靭になってくると、より良い空き家の活用が生まれてくるんじゃないかな。
Authorities will have to act fast. By year 2038, some experts predict the number of Akiya across Japan will more than double to 23 million, or 1 in 3 houses. Michio Ishida, CNA, Kitsuki, Japan.
For more on Japan's empty homes, do catch CNA correspondent tonight at 7:30 Singapore, Hong Kong time, or anytime on CNA.Asia or on YouTube. And that wraps up Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. Thanks for watching.